Howdy everybody, it's Bruce with Board Game Impact. In this video, I'm going to be talking about loss aversion, which was inspired for me by playing Clans of Caledonia recently. Loss aversion, in a nutshell, is this thing that stopped me from being able to play to my best. The game bested me, and I'm going to be teaching you about what that is and then what you can do to overcome it. And so, if you are new to Board Game Impact, hi, my name is Bruce, and typically we make a bi-weekly podcast. I do that with my buddy Josh. We both work full-time in education, and then on top of that, I'm also getting a PhD in human resource development, so organization consulting. And what we do on the podcast, and I've been doing in these videos, is taking our educational lenses to break them down for you and your gaming group's benefit. And if that sounds like something of interest to you, please do hit subscribe and, of course, that little bell icon so that way you can be notified when these new videos come out. And so this video, like I said, is going to be all about loss aversion. And I'm really excited to dig into this because it was something for me that has helped me since I realized it was happening. And so I hope this is helpful for you. Okay, so again, we're going to be talking about loss aversion in Clans of Caledonia. It's really about loss aversion in general. I'm even going to toss in some things on Jeopardy. So if you're a fan of Jeopardy, definitely going to want to stay tuned for that. Okay, so what is Clans of Caledonia? Let's start there. So Clans of Caledonia is a wildly popular Euro game that came out in 2017. It was kickstarted. It takes place in Scotland. So it's a Euro game in which you are going to be deploying either whiskey or grain production or cows or sheep, etc., to the board to then produce those goods. Like, so a sheep will give you wool, a cow will give you milk. You can then take the milk and turn it into cheese. You can plant corn. You can turn the corn into bread or whiskey, and so you'll have different little workers around the board doing this, and the game's going to take place over 5 rounds. And so what's cool about it for me is the board is 4 boards put together, so you can have some nice variable setup. But I also enjoy Euro games from the lens of they really activate my mind and have me really focus in on trying to do things well. They kind of distract me a little bit from the norm, which is interesting because Euro games sometimes are viewed as being light in immersion, when in actuality, it all depends on what lights up your brain, right? And so for me, the puzzles and things like that that are involved with the Euro game can really do some cool things for me. So in Clans of Caledonia, you're going to be producing those goods to then sell them off to get points. Of course, you're going to win by having the most points in the game. That's of course. But how this game does it, it's a little different. You'll get a point at the end of the game for every basic resource you've produced that you still have in your collection. You'll get 2 points for every produced goods, so like milk, not milk, but where you turn milk into cheese or corn into whiskey or into bread. You'll also get points for these little end of round bonuses and a couple other things that'll also let you discover, and I'm going to talk about here in a second. So what this looks like, you have your little player board again. So all these spots will actually be covered up during the game, and you'll be deploying them to the board. So the sheep would go here, and then at the end of every round, you'll produce the goods that are then uncovered, which is very clever and very cool. And you can also, if you produced any corn or have any corn, you can turn them into either bread or whiskey. And then you'll also get money to deploy these things onto the board by either having woodcutters in wood areas or mountain people. We'll just go with that. Miners, there we go. That's words, in the mountains. But of course, if you notice, all of these things have a cost. And so in Clans of Caledonia, you'll also be given there's a random setup, and you get to choose. There's a couple different ways you can choose. You can look at the rule book for that, to have a different faction. It's your own like little specialty thing. So this is one I've played a couple times now, Clan Mackenzie, which specializes in whiskey, which I thought was very actually intuitive because I used to work in the wine industry part-time when I was living out in California, and whiskey, like wine, it's going to take some time for aging and development of the product to get it to where you want it. And so by playing as Clan Mackenzie, you can put a wine barrel in your like little storage area on your separate little player guy thing here. And then after round after 2 rounds of how to get in there, it's going to give you more money because you're going to have better stuff, right? It makes sense. It's just like wine, just like whiskey. So I actually find that pretty thematic. And so the problem, though, came in with these. There's this whole area that's called contracts. And so how this works is on your turn as an action, you can fulfill a contract that you've picked up in a previous turn. And so what you do is you take the goods on the left that you would have to have in your supply, your personal supply. Now you might have produced them, you might have gone to the market and bought them, etc. And you'll take these goods. In this case, with this one, it's a bread, a cheese, and a whiskey, and you'll turn that into 3 tobacco, an upgrade, 2 upgrades, and $10. Now, money can be pretty tight in this game. The problem, though, for me, came in with this one, and these ones, the meat. The problem with it is because if you look at the board, your player board, the meat comes from either having a sheep or having a cow on the board. And when you're fulfilling one of those, you would actually, so if I was the blue player down here, I would get rid of this cow from the board to fulfill a contract with beef. Now, the kicker, though, is the game incentivizes having area control in different areas. So like if this person has a shipping network of 2 spaces, this would be 1, 2, 3 areas. And if they have the most spread of a place, so the most clusters, they're going to get 18 points at the end of the game. So the game incentivizes having a spread out network and having this area control. And so at the same time, you'd be sacrificing your area control to fulfill this contract. The other thing, if you notice, every single spot on the board has a cost associated with putting it there besides the cost for the actual resource to put it on the board for later production. So not only in order to fulfill those contracts, do you have to sacrifice area control, which is worth points. You're also sacrificing production. So if you're getting rid of a cow, you're going to sacrifice production of milk, which you might need for cheese. And so it's all this really tightly interwoven network. That's fascinating. Now, what's interesting is that I didn't realize in the first game that I actually didn't take a single one of those kind of contracts, not a one. And after our first play, which I was just inspired, like, hey, let's try this Euro game that we haven't played over on Board Game Arena, we immediately wanted to play it again. And at the start of the game, I realized, wait a second, I'd never taken at all one of those types of contracts. And I realized there was something going on for me. And that I didn't want to lose some of that board control. I also just put all that work and money, which I said can be tight, into having that board control or having those resources for that production. And so I wanted to make this video to really talk about this because it inspired this. And I played it again and I intentionally challenged myself. No, I am going to try and do this. I want to learn. And so again, that's a quick crash course in Clouds of Caledonia. And now I'm going to unpack this whole thing called loss aversion. And then I'm going to give you some things that you can do. So first of all, it's just generally known that pains and losses are generally more influential in the psyche. This sometimes means, though, that we are going to avoid even potentially having a pain or a loss. And so I think with my first play, I was avoiding the loss of having the sheep or the cows on the board without even realizing that that was driving me, right? And I think that's fascinating. So what is this whole thing of loss aversion? So loss aversion, this is one definition of it. It's a greater sensitivity to prospective losses than to prospective gains of equal size. And so there's research from Simon 2019 that shows that if you were to lose $10 or find $10, so it's like, you know, those times where like you reach in your pocket and it's like, I left $10 in here, or I found $10, or you find $10 on the street. That sensitivity in your brain isn't going to light up as much as if you were to lose $10. And more often in studies that have been done, people remember losing $10 and will do more to avoid losing $10 than they will to get $10, which is just fascinating if you think about it. Yes, there's an important thing to note, though, and that there's going to be change in all things while we're going forward with this. But that doesn't mean that we aren't intentional and recognizing how our own psyche might be influencing the way we're looking at that change. And that's why I'm making this video. Okay, so again, I was sacrificing not only the investment that I had made, and I'm going to be doing a separate video just on sunk cost fallacy, so we'll get into that in another video. That'll be exciting. So make sure to hit subscribe and that bell icon so you know when that one comes out. And I was to be sacrificing this area control, which in this case, red could take that area over. And I'd also be sacrificing the production of those resources. Okay, so a couple things factoring into this whole loss aversion thing. First of all, status quo bias. We prefer what already exists, period. We just prefer because it seems to be working in the moment. And so in a board game, we know our current victory points. So like with Clans of Caledonia, it does a victory point track. And so or glory point track is what they call it. I know how many points I already have. Everything else is kind of left in a little bit of abstract and unknown future state. So I know if I am ahead, I know everything's kind of working for me, but that doesn't mean somebody can't surge ahead with some end of round or end of game things that just aren't calculated yet. So it's important to acknowledge that the default reference point for us is the present state. Unless we're very intentional about ourselves and our play, the default reference point when we play games is going to be on that present state. So at the present moment, when I was in those games, I was feeling I have this area control. I have these cows out here. These cows are being good to me. They're giving me milk, or the sheep are giving me wool, and I can plan for that. So our default reference point is our present state. Now, I'm not saying that is right or maybe how we should go about things, but that's just in general everyone's reference point. With that, though, we also have the endowment effect, which is that we value things that we already own. And so with having the contracts, I don't own that. It's just that I'd fulfill it. I'd actually be losing everything. I'd be losing everything I have on the board, technically. But I might abstractly be getting some points. But I don't own that yet. I don't own those points. I don't own those resources or outcomes of those contracts yet. And so therefore, it's really hard for me and any of us to value the things we don't yet have. And when the things we do have, we're going to value more. And so we even have that working against us. Additionally, we've got a thing called prospect theory, and I'm going to break this down in two ways. One is that we tend to be risk averse when making gains because we don't want to sacrifice what we already have. And I've got a really cool example for that in a second. And we are more risk acceptant with respect to of losses. And so this is actually something we talked about on the most recent episode of the podcast. And does cross over with sunk cost fallacy a little bit. And that is when we are already in a position where it's like, I'm already losing, then we're more likely to be risk acceptant. But when we know our status and things like that, we're more averse to making gains, which is fascinating. And this actually played out in Jeopardy, this whole prospect theory and loss aversion. And so there's been some fascinating studies on Jeopardy, particularly around the daily double. Now, I am a huge Jeopardy fan. And at the time of this recording and posting, Alex Trebek just recently passed away. And that hurts. I grew up going over to Grandma's house across the street and watching Jeopardy. And of course, Wheel of Fortune too. But I love Jeopardy. Loved it. And still do to this day, and it's a tragic thing to have lost him. And so that's also why I wanted to put this Jeopardy example in here once I crossed it in the literature, because in making this video, I do spend a considerable amount of time in the library looking over articles and publications. And so in Jeopardy, there's the daily double, which when you pick a tile for, let's say it's board games for $800. Now, instead of it being for $800, you can wager up to $2,000 if you don't have much money. Or if you're in anywhere above $2,000, you can wager anything you want. And you'll get a double of what you wager. Now, obviously, you have to have that money, quote unquote, in your bank for the game. Now, what's interesting is the people who were in the lead, they, on average, wager less than those who are already losing. And so the people who are already in the lead, the people who already know the categories and are doing really well in the game, wager less. And I'm not talking, oh, they happen to be a couple points less, things like that. No, I'm talking like this, a statistical difference, which means it was at the, they actually analyzed it at what's called the 95% confidence interval, which means if you look at a bell graph, it's that little tail at the very, very end, which it's super significant. It's not super significant. It's just statistically significant that and stands out as, no, this is an actual change. It is different than the other players. And what's fascinating is that this just wasn't the people on just one kind of Jeopardy. This was across all genders of people who ever appeared on Jeopardy, across every type of tournament and regular play. So besides regular play, it also impacted the Tournament of Champions, college and teen tournaments, and even Kids Week. So that is just fascinating. So this loss aversion thing is real. It affects us. And so what's important is what we do about it. And so what can we do? Well, first of all, we need to start with you. Just like I had to start with me. So I played that game of Clans of Caledonia, and then we're like, ooh, we got time. Let's play another one. It's Board Game Arena. I can get these games to the table really fast. We've already invested all the time to learn it, so let's play it again. And then I had to stop, pause, and reflect on, why didn't I take those last time? Why didn't I take this one type of thing? And that was kind of my mirror. And so what I encourage you to do is pause and reflect. Are there things in games that you do in avoiding strategies because these other ones feel comfortable? And that's the important part. So you need to recognize how this might be affecting you, because it might be affecting us differently. The next thing from there is make the concessions easier to accept. Now, what this means is make it easier to accept. So maybe changing your reference point of what your goal of the gameplay is. It might not be to win. I know that might sound fascinating, but like a lot of times I just play games to have fun. And I'm not necessarily trying to always win. I'm just like, here, let's try an experience. Now, that doesn't mean I'm not being competitive. There's a very big difference. So sometimes I might be, you might need to change my intent of what am I trying to get out of this experience. The other thing is, if we know that we value more what we already have, well, maybe it's important for us to try some changes earlier in game states to then have the effects go more long lasting. And so I'm sorry if you can hear this, but my dog is sleeping on my lap. So if you're hearing a snore, that's what that is. Thanks for understanding. I try and do these all in one cut. So make the concession easier to understand and easier to accept. And so for me, that can sometimes play out in, okay, I'm going to make these changes earlier in a game. I'm going to intentionally start this strategy from the beginning, so that way my infrastructure is designed for this type of play. Doors and windows. I'm sure you've heard the quote of like, oh, when life closes a door, another window opens, right? And so my dad likes to sometimes throw in, but sometimes there's hell in the hallway. And that's kind of where loss aversion can come in. It's like, I don't know what's going on in the hallway. And that's because I might not realize there's a window open yet. And so with loss aversion, it's recognizing that because I would be losing something in one area does not mean I'm not gaining anything. So sometimes we need to just pause and reflect of, oh, I just lost this and this kind of hurts right now. But do I also stop and reflect, because we know pain and suffering can have a more impactful on the psyche. Do I also pause and reflect though and say, but what am I gaining? What opportunities here? Am I coming at this with an appreciative inquiry towards what I could get out of this game moving forward? As I encourage you to do that, try and not be held up by what you just lost. Try and see the opportunities that you now get to do that you might not have considered before. Change our reference points. And I got a couple things with this one. So the first thing with changing our reference point is figuring out like what type of goals we might want. So try different type of goals, because our reference point of intention of play, etc. But the goals part, moving beyond having the most points. in Clans of Caledonia, if you have the most points before you value all the contracts and stuff, you're probably going to lose, especially if it's a close game, because there's a totality of ways to get points. And I have seen players just skyrocket with some of the contracts. So by me avoiding these contracts due to this, don't get me wrong, I had a lot of points in some other areas, that area control, but that was only a difference of about 6, because second place for area control, no matter how much less area, was 12 points, where mine was 18, so a difference of 6. So there might be different point differentials in some different areas. So stop trying to just go and have the most points, and instead be trying to get points. If you see what I'm saying. So you never stop just going. You're more intentional about just getting points. Don't let yourself just be in this one mindset of points in general. Just be intentional about your actions being aligned to get the points. And that might seem different, but one is focused broadly on a generic strategy, and the other one is on actions, which then can hopefully then yield those strategies, those other outcomes. Micro goals. You might be setting your goals too big. That's really illustrated with that general of like move beyond getting points. So micro goals mean, okay, well, I want to try and do this by this point. And you might want to scale it back. You might want to say, well, in the first round of this new play of this game, I want to have some cows on the board, so that way in the second round I can then sell those cows. So if you notice, that's only 2 rounds of a 5-round game. And so if you have micro goals and trying to accomplish that, you might build up your confidence. So there's a really good book I talked about in some other episodes and on the podcast, The Willpower Instinct. It's by Kelly McGonigal. And is if we scale things down and recognize success, we can then scale up, and because you have a proof of concept. And so by doing that, you might then be able to build your bigger strategies long term. That is also play style goals. So again, this goes back to what is your intent and the goal of why you're playing that game at that time. And then the last thing I want to leave you with is the question of what does it feel like to be wrong or right? So for me, while I was playing that first game of Clans of Caledonia, I felt freaking good. I felt great. I was having a fun time. At the start of that second play, I realized I was wrong. So many times we feel in the moment, regardless if we're doing something right or doing something wrong, we feel normal. And so if your answer to what does it feel like to be right or wrong was, ooh, judged or hurt or shame, right? Or with to be right, vindicated, all those kind of things, hell yeah type stuff. That's to know you were right or wrong. In the moment, it all feels normal. And so this is important because in those moments, loss aversion is going to feel normal. It's going to feel like you just playing the game if you were winning, not even knowing that things might be undercutting your ability to fully win or to do the best you can. So your own psyche might be holding you back. And so it's only until we had that mirror held up to ourselves, by ourselves, that we can recognize those moments and improve. This isn't a bad thing. It's getting better at something. I mean, that's amazing. That's called working towards mastery. And the more we can do that, the more proud we can be in everything we do. And so I hope that this is helpful. Loss aversion's a real thing. And it's something that plays out. It's the human psyche. So the question is, what do we do about it? So if you enjoyed this video, please do make sure to hit that subscribe, click that bell icon so that way you get all these videos. I encourage you to go over and check out our YouTube podcasts over on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, iHeartRadio, all the places. I guarantee you it's there. But also I'm curious to hear from you. what situations have you found yourself in with loss aversion, or what losses do you typically try to avoid in games, whether you know it or not, consciously or subconsciously? And if you like this kind of content, and if you like me doing this has been a newer venture, I encourage you also to support me over on the Patreon, because it helps me be able to carve out time from my full-time educational work and my studies in for my PhD, and to be able to support those efforts and to spend the time in the library and things like that. So I thank you for encouraging this, and I'd love to hear from you and have a conversation with you over in the comment section. So I'm going to end this like I end every episode of the podcast, and that is, go out and make your positive impact on the world. Talk to you later.